We have one very important piece of information to hear about from an entirely different venue, you might say. And Keith Hansen will be speaking to us. He's the Global Practices Vice President of the World Bank Group. He's one of two such vice presidents. His key responsibilities include the setup and oversight of new global practices, which will bring all technical staff together so we can display the best skills and expertise to our clients everywhere to help tackle the most difficult development challenges around the world, and I'll let him tell you more about that. But I would remind you that he holds a Master's in Public Health Affairs degree from Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University. He has a law degree from Stanford and holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Yale. Please welcome Keith Hansen.
Good morning, everybody. Members of the Academy. I've always wanted to be able to say that in front of a microphone. I'm delighted to be here today. It may seem a little unusual at such an august assembly of deep technical specialists to have an economist here from the World Bank, but we got the invitation. We wanted to take part in this because we do feel this is one of the premier potential altering transformational investments that developing countries can make that is currently being underused, to say the least, and which we are trying to emphasize more and more in our support to countries, not just as a health investment, but as a true, powerful economic investment in their futures. Some of what I say will not be news to many of you, I suspect, but I do feel it would be useful just to cover why the World Bank sees breastfeeding as a crucial cornerstone of any sound social policy, and particularly in poor countries. The World Bank, as you may know, is the world's largest source of multilateral development finance for developing countries, investing in everything from agriculture to urban development, water, health, macro and fiscal management, clean energy, education, virtually the entire span of development sectors in virtually every developing country in the world. So we put a heavy emphasis on finding those investments that are going to be most transformational for countries and help them both to eliminate extreme poverty, which is a goal that we have set for ourselves by the year 2030, and to boost what we call shared prosperity, which is to lift up the bottom 40% of the income distribution in every country, and to help them do better and have better life prospects. We know that neither of these goals, is going to be attainable unless we can ensure that pregnant mothers and young children get the right nutrition at the right time, because this sets so much of the trajectory of the lives, both of the children and their families, that it's very difficult to change course if the right building blocks are not in place from the outset. We think that undernutrition is therefore one of the most serious and still most underattended global development challenges. Not just a health challenge, not just a nutrition challenge, but a true development challenge. We have 162 million people worldwide under the age of 5 who are chronically malnourished, stunted. And as you know, if you reach the age of 2 and you don't have the proper trajectory, it's very, very difficult to regain that later in childhood, let alone later in life. 6 million of these children die every year. Now, the good news is that number is half of what it was a generation ago in 1990. And this represents actually an extraordinary and truly historic achievement. Never before in human history has the number of children dying in childhood declined for so many years in a row, or perhaps ever at all. And remember, the population has increased dramatically since 1990. Globally, but the number of child deaths is down by half. So 6 million a year is still 6 million too many. But we have made tremendous progress in the last 25 years. If we want to continue and finish the job so nobody dies in childhood, we have to tackle undernutrition, because it's now responsible for 45% of those deaths that still happen every year. We also know that children who are iodine deficient are losing up to 13 IQ points, which is nearly a full standard deviation, and they're getting 1 year less of schooling on average around the world. So these have lifelong implications for children, their development, their family's development. And those who have deficient in vitamin A are 22% more likely to die. So these are very much life-changing events that happen very early in a child's life and that need to be addressed as early as possible. Obviously, the most damaging and irreversible impacts happen in the first 1,000 days of a child's existence, from gestation to her second birthday, which is why we're putting so much emphasis on that first 1,000 days now. This can drive a vicious cycle across generations, where undernourished mothers give birth to undernourished girls who then grow up to be undernourished women themselves, and the cycle turns its way down through the generations. But this is often expressed in the terms that I just did it, which is the irrevocable losses. On the flip side of this, of course, is if you're able to achieve nutrition at that level, the gains are equally irrevocable. A child who grows another 4 centimeters, or who attains an extra 10 IQ points, or develops a stronger immune system, or is more able to cognitively and emotionally adapt and connect to others, is never going to lose those skills or those attributes. These are truly one-shot, lifelong benefits that carry on much farther than any other investment that we can think of, or the kinds of things that we invest in. Many development investments are reversible. You build a road, and you actually have to rebuild it every 3 years, because the maintenance just to keep roads up is an extraordinary, continuous undertaking. You do something wonderful with the economy, and next year there's a hurricane, or oil prices spike or drop, or something happens, and all those gains can quickly be swept away. The gains from early childhood nutrition are forever. And to a large extent, many of them are free because they've come prepackaged in this unbelievable intervention called breastfeeding that is, of course, what defines us as a mammalian species. And the proof of this is in the lifelong impacts. Children who escape undernutrition are much more likely to survive and stay in school, and they're much more likely to escape poverty, about 33% more likely on average, and their wages are anywhere from 5 to 50% higher than their peers who were not able to escape. And these are from very rigorous longitudinal studies. This isn't one of those 3 months, sort of observational ecological studies that gets passed off as hard science. This has been done over decades now with fairly substantial cohorts and very robustly tested. And the impact and the correlation and the causation among these things is very strongly established. Women who escape undernutrition, in particular, are about 10% more likely to own their own businesses, and that's today. And of course, as we hope more opportunities open up for women in the future, we would expect to see this effect grow. And entire countries in Africa and Asia are losing anywhere up to 11% of their GDP to undernutrition alone, can obviously reverse this by making the investments and the social changes necessary. There are many good success stories in how to solve malnutrition. Countries as widely diverse as Senegal, Brazil, Peru, Thailand, and the state of Maharashtra and India have shown that we can stop undernutrition and save lives and build futures. If we can get good early childhood nutrition programs in place, we can lock in human capital for life and all the potential that comes with it. To do this, we need to provide key health services. We need to enable and empower parents to care well for their young infants, to understand the full benefits of proper breastfeeding, good nutrition, of checkups, of growth monitoring, and the full range of services. And of course, we really need to emphasize continually this very simple and very powerful intervention, breastfeeding. It's odd to call it an intervention. This is probably the second most natural behavior of the species, and yet in today's modern world, this is one of those fantastic things we did for 500,000 years that has begun to fall off our behavior set because of all the mixed blessings of modernity. You know all this, but it bears repeating. This is a natural, renewable food source that needs no packaging, no transportation, no storage, cooking, refrigeration. It goes with you, and it is environmentally friendly. It is a win-win for the health of the mother and the child. It creates lower infant mortality, creates benefits for maternal health. It reduces the lifelong risk of non-communicable chronic diseases for the child, and of course it promotes all that tremendous emotional bonding that comes with that comes with breastfeeding. It's a win-win for the child's education because it helps ensure healthy brain development, longer school attendance, and a higher IQ. Again, all of this has been demonstrated through a series of studies. And it has a very, very high rate of return as it's a pure financial investment. Forget all the humanitarian and emotional arguments, which are very powerful and compelling. Just in sheer, raw, bottom-line economic terms, this may be the single most effective investment a country can make in any sector for any reason. And wonderfully, it also reduces inequity. This ensures that all children, irrespective of their gender, whether it's from a rich country or a poor one, can get the best possible start in life and start from a very even basis. So I sometimes joke that if breastfeeding did not exist and somebody invented it today, they would really be eligible for a joint Nobel Prize in medicine and economics for all these reasons. So what do we need to do to get this at the level it needs to be? First, obviously, governments need to invest in breastfeeding programs. They have to ensure that health and nutrition budgets in particular include support for breastfeeding, and not just financial support, but the kind of social change and norm setting that is required. People tend to do what the people around them do, and one problem we had is as this has fallen off as a sort of normative behavior, it's more and more difficult just to go in and target isolated individuals. A pamphlet, a speech alone is never enough. You really need to work that social change that enables everybody to see that all the other women do it, and so there must be something good about this. Obviously, we need to prioritize and finance creating breastfeeding-friendly settings. This came up in the Q&A after the last session. Workplaces, health facilities, public places, et cetera. And again, this should not just be through the health sector, but through other sectors that influence things like this. Workplace policies, social protection programs, anything that links people to services and to either public or private spaces can be adapted for this. Laws need to be adopted in some places to protect breastfeeding. Obviously, the adoption of the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes, maternity protection laws, safe spaces for breastfeeding, other things that can enable this to become or resume being the norm that it was for so long. Employers can take a lead in providing support to breastfeeding mothers. Policies to support breastfeeding women, providing designated private spaces for breastfeeding and expressing, allowing flexible scheduling to come back to work, and to support milk expression during work. I was once walking through a building about 15, 20 years ago when this great changeover was happening, and I happened to see a memo that said, please note that effective immediately, room 5276 is no longer the designated smoking room. Smokers are asked to please go outside and smoke in front of the building. And there was a little line of asterisks, and then underneath it said, we are pleased to announce that room 5236 is now designated the official nursing room. I said, God, I hope they cleared out the secondhand smoke before they did that. But at least the spirit was in the right direction. So on the World Bank's part, we are influential in helping countries think through their challenges and make priorities, assign priorities for their investments, their policy attention, and for the bully pulpit of their political leadership. So one thing we've tried to do is to highlight the importance of nutrition overall to virtually all developing countries. So one thing we've done is to add stunting as an indicator to what we call our corporate scorecard. These are the sort of meta measures by which we are ultimately holding ourselves accountable, the goals that we're really aiming toward, as opposed to the sort of year-on-year things that define, whether we're delivering with efficiency and met our budget, all of which are important, but they should all be guided by higher-order objectives, and one of them is to reduce stunting. Worldwide. So this is something we want to track in its own right, but we also consider it one of the most powerful predictors of whether we will be able to attain the full suite of sustainable development goals that are currently being negotiated in the UN system. In our country operations, we right now have 30 projects that explicitly reference breastfeeding objectives, working in all regions of the world, Timor-Leste to Yemen, Bangladesh, Peru, Niger, the Kyrgyz Republic, and elsewhere. And this work is not not only part of our health, nutrition, and population cluster, but also our social protection and labor practice, which has a lot of influence in the programs that bring people to services or influence how they interact in the labor force and in the workplace. We have initiatives that are working to strengthen infant and young child feeding policies, and we're doing a lot of analytic work, generally in economics, to understand the costs of investing and the benefits of investing, to create the tools so policymakers can understand the cost effectiveness of nutrition interventions versus the other things that they might choose to invest in. At the end of the day, if you want to persuade policymakers, you have to speak their language, which is usually economics, and you need to be able to justify things on the same basis at which they assess much more hard-headed, in their mind, investments in things like, concrete and things that they can actually go out and look at. So it can be an uphill battle, but the strength of the evidence is so strong for nutrition that we feel it's a winnable one. And because we recognize that breastfeeding, which combined with other interventions such as micronutrient supplements to deworming and growth monitoring is so powerful, we are trying to present countries with the knowledge that all of this together is going to be a very, very potent package in driving their economic development. But of course, the World Bank is just one actor. We are a trivial share of financial support compared to the country's own resources and to capital flows around the world. Official development assistance is a very small share of all the money that is at the disposal now of developing countries. This is a good thing. It reflects the growth of prosperity around the world in recent decades, the growth of private foundations, other organizations interested in this. But it does mean that we need to get more and more organizations engaged. And we really need to be able to fund and support all of this on a massive scale. So this is why just a few weeks ago, along with the Children's Investment Fund Foundation of the UK, the UBS Optimus Foundation, which is one of the largest capital management firms on earth, the UK Department for International Development, and UNICEF, we have launched the Power of Nutrition. This is a UK-based charity and fund which is aiming to unlock up to $1 billion in the next 5 years of new private and public financing to help improve child nutrition. And it's designed to be in a way that's going to support well-designed country programs. It's not meant to be freestanding or separately owned or operated, and to come under very robust strategies that are going to ensure that things are sustainable, that they're embedded in how the countries are designing and running their own systems, and that brings in expertise from external partners to help make these things as consequential as possible. And to have the greatest possible impact. It's going to use private and philanthropic grants alongside of government funding and financing from IDA, which is the World Bank's Fund for the Poorest Countries, and act as a catalyst to try to significantly increase investments in nutrition and drive large-scale progress in countries. There are thousands of wonderful boutique projects all around the world that have success in a village or a district or something, but the stumbling block has always been getting these things to scale and getting them mainstreamed, getting the knowledge of what's working to enough policymakers that this can really become part and parcel of how they do national practice overall. It's going to focus on channeling more money to do the things that we know work, and this means following the science as much as possible. Those of you in the room who are scientists, we are looking very much to you to help to demonstrate and validate what works. This is not meant to be a sort of wildly experimental activity. It's really meant to take what works to scale. Breastfeeding obviously needs no further justification, but the ways of getting this to work remain very much under study. What's going to be the most effective in helping to offset the long trend away from this? Taking micronutrient supplements to make sure that children are getting vitamin A and iodine and other interventions that we know work, but where we have yet to crack the nut of how to get them to scale. This Power Nutrition has actually developed an innovative matching offer that guarantees that every dollar in private funding will be multiplied 3 or 4 or 5 times by matching that's secured from other funders. So it gives private donors an added inducement to put money in, knowing that they're going to be able to leverage much more dollar for dollar, sort of in the way that NPR annoys you by saying, if you call before 12 o'clock, your money will be doubled, and so forth. It seems to work for them, so we're hoping it will work for nutrition. And at the World Bank's part, we are very pleased that one of the mechanisms which will be operating through this partnership is a $55 million multi-donor trust fund that eligible countries can apply to right now. So this is money that's in the bank. that poor countries can start to access. And working with UNICEF, we're proud to be the first implementing partners for this Power of Nutrition initiative. The first country to benefit is already signed up. This is Tanzania, just at the end of last month, which will receive $20 million through this trust fund in order to scale up what they're already doing with the hope of achieving lasting nationwide impact. So in short, ending undernutrition is an issue of equity and saving lives, and also of boosting economies and prosperity and prospects for all people around the world. And therefore, it is very close to the core of the World Bank's agenda and mission, and it's very close to what we are doing in working with countries to try to help them scale up. There's been a great deal of interest and goodwill around nutrition for a long time. It took a while for it to get outside the confines of the scientific community into the broader public policy community. We're quite confident that its moment has arrived. The creation of this very muscular public-private partnership is, I think, one of the most tangible signs of that. This is real money in international development terms, and it is a broad partnership in terms of the kinds of organizations who are coming to the table and the seriousness with which they undertake things. So we're very hopeful that the moment is here, and now it's up to us to capitalize on this to make a lasting difference for everybody, starting with this most powerful intervention of all, breastfeeding. So that's why we are happy to be here today, and I'm happy to speak to the members of the Academy.
Thank you very much. It's always nice to talk about money. And I haven't balanced my checkbook yet this month. But, also, did you know that the brain doubles in size in the first year of life? Mm-hmm. And not the same size increase for 15 more years? So the first year is very important. So, Tim?
Tim Tabalik, I'm from Michigan. That's something we haven't heard this in the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine, is the economic impact that this has, and your understanding of it from the World Bank standpoint. Does this information trickle down to large corporations, international corporations, even local banks that kind of stimulate local economies? Do they understand the importance of this nationally or even locally in states or smaller countries? And is that information that you just presented today, does that somehow get disseminated to these organizations? Mm-hmm. And my second question is, I'm the treasurer of this organization, and since you're a bank, and if you got any extra money floating around, I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't asking.
Along the same lines, what you described at the very beginning, which I'm very interested in, is essentially a financial engine that breastfeeding, or the human endeavor to provide what I used to call survivability of the species, mm-hmm. is not only an economic but a cultural engine that can be attached or integrated together. Is the World Bank interested in also supporting in the U.S. economy the same concept of that financial engine development? Mm-hmm. Because I think it has tentacles that are profound into the decision-making process at local levels and government levels at the same time. I think it's a great model, actually, to move and have perspective on for us. Mm-hmm. And I'd like your feedback on that. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Did you want to say? Oh.
Why don't we collect a few?
Okay. I had a similar comment.
Okay.
I'm Kelly Scanlon from CDC Atlanta, mm-hmm. and I want to thank you for making the economic case and making it globally. It is so important to continue to make the economic case in the U.S. as well. In every congressional justification we write for our funding, we bring up the economics and the medical cost savings and the social cost savings in the U.S. as well with breastfeeding. So just to really appeal to all the researchers here, Melissa Bartik's done some nice work, there's others, but having that economic case made in the literature continually helps us tremendously get the funds we need to put out to states and communities for the support. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to echo that. I have a little thing on my book, on my wall. I says, I have written, if education is expensive, try ignorance. It's a lot more expensive. The same thing as if medical research is expensive, try diseases, and that's a very good message that you are making. There are many other least expensive interventions that can be applicable to improve child survival in the developing world. One of them in my field is that has come up now more recently is the delayed cord clamping. WHO has recommended that immediate cord clamping after the birth of the child is for the benefit of the obstetricians or a nervous pediatrician who is there. Other than that, there is no need to do that right away. In fact, you wait until about 2 to 3 minutes in a term baby, increases their hemoglobin, increases their iron stores, decreases the incidence of iron deficiency anemia, which is a very important contributor for abnormal brain maturation. So in a sense, there are tremendous cost-benefit effect, and this is zero expense. So this has been now made into, but still its practice is not very widespread. So there are many similar issues that you probably can take care of, including cord prophylaxis, etc. But anyway, that's probably beyond your scope of approach. But making an economic case for cheap interventions or low-cost interventions that can have a profound effect, breastfeeding is one, and similar others can be included in that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Georgia. I'm from the National WIC Association. And I just want to also emphasise the importance of the economic impacts. Our advocacy team is on the Hill a lot at the moment, and one of the questions they are asked a lot is what is the social cost benefit of having peer counselling. They want more specific numbers and details on the economic impact of breastfeeding. So, any advice on how we can actually get more information on the social or undertake social cost benefit analysis of things like breastfeeding peer support would be hugely welcomed and hugely valuable. Thank you.
Okay, shall I take those?
Oh, please do.
Okay. So that's an interesting suite of questions. Let me speak to the policy angle first. Thank you for the kind words. The economic argument is not just it's a nice to have, it's a necessary to have from where we operate, and it sounds like many of you are in the same situation. You really need to be able to express things in a way that makes them comparable to other demands on policymakers' time and attention. And as you know, unfortunately, it's never enough to say children are dying or people are suffering, because everybody who walks in that door says the same thing, whether it's road safety or international terrorism or whatever it may be, short of just a commemorative day. Everything is somehow making people suffer or make their lives better. So it really comes down to where can we reduce the most suffering at the least cost, and that's where the economics becomes so important. But I think whether we're talking to corporations or public policymakers or anybody else, there's always two issues. One is the time frame, and the other is the robustness of the tools and the evidence. One problem of working only through private sector organizations is the time scale and the payoff of these investments is so long. The payoff is enormous, but the full payoff is only realized over the course of a full lifetime. It's literally intergenerational. So the sort of far-sighted policymaker has a tremendous inbuilt incentive to do this, and when you see how low the cost is relative to these long-term effects, it's quite powerful. But if you're a company that's just looking to reduce your medical insurance costs over the next 5 years, it's a little tougher sell. So this has been one reason I think nutrition has lagged in terms of muscling its way onto the policy agenda. Is it's not quite the same thing as things that pay off over a shorter period, or where the minister can say, look, we built 3 new schools during my administration, or we cleaned up 100 miles of unsafe highways, whatever it may be. And that's something that requires work and sometimes some very careful, what's the word I'm looking for, framing. So the fact at how quickly the benefits can actually be vested, even if they pay off over a longer period. It's as if saying you could take a macroeconomic decision today and within 1,000 days it would be locked in, for the entire life of everybody who was affected by it, and get people to think in those terms. It still won't change the payoff timetable as much, but at least it might make them more willing to invest in this. But the other thing is effective tool. It's only cost effective if the tool is cost effective, and the tool for getting the outcome that you want. And this has also been a challenge until recently, which is where the evidence becomes so important, that certain kinds of programs can, in fact, induce the kind of behaviors that we want, can provide the information more cheaply, can work the level of social change that's required, and that these things are affordable, that they can be encompassed within national cultural norms, national sort of social standards, don't have to be external impositions, and so forth. So it's the cause is very compelling in and of itself, but the ways that you get on to the agenda and convince people to take action are much more prosaic and sometimes even boil down to very humble things. So this is what we've learned, which is why we emphasize so much the numbers where we have them or the success stories, whether they're national or district-based. The bank doesn't have a formal role in advising in the United States. We exist to serve the developing countries around the world, which is why we were created at the end of World War II. Our research, of course, is available to everybody, and since a lot of this is biological, it's equally applicable to poor communities in this country as it is to poor communities elsewhere. And malnutrition rates in some of the poor communities in the U.S. rival those in some poor countries, obviously. So. And there's no harm in, sort of making a parallel between saying, thank you, these programs have proven very beneficial elsewhere, and there's been longitudinal work that's demonstrated the high payoff, the economic return, the social returns over time. But it's not something the bank directly engages in, simply because that's not what we exist to do. And in terms of, I think I covered it. So. Anyone else?
Are we going to let this gentleman off the hook?
Hi, is this on? Great. Karen Lapping with Save the Children. I'd love your thoughts a little bit more, what you talked about the difficulty of framing this issue in terms of a lot of us, more on the implementation side, tend to work with kind of 5-year time frames for projects and things of that nature. And the kind of, investment in prevention and the payoff that we talk about with nutrition is that longer time period. And also certain indicators like stunting are pretty difficult to move. So we've been kind of struggling a lot with, is that, kind of the right indicator to focus on? What are intermediaries that kind of are along that pathway to success that we can discuss? So I was really compelled by what you said about, reframing, talking about at the end of this 1,000 days, this is this vested and, kind of payoff that you'll see down the road. Could you maybe just dig into that a little bit more? Because I think that's more of a discussion that we need to have. And I think that's where, especially the donors in this room with USAID and Gates and Bank in particular, are just the ones that come to my mind as being really critical and so supportive of this work. And so if you could just let us in a little bit more into some of your dialogue and thinking around how to kind of really crack that nut, think beyond a 5-year kind of project time frame, and some insight into that would be fascinating and helpful.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that analysis. Though the focus seemed to be mostly on the benefit and not so much on the cost. And I want to challenge the whole group here. We hear over and over again about various programs, global, comprehensive programs that have an impact on the success of breastfeeding, measured usually in breastfeeding rates. But that, as a scientist, is not very helpful, because anybody who does an analysis of a global comprehensive program knows there are multiple variables there, and not all of them are the critical ones. If I could remind people that we have baby-friendly hospital, we have 10 steps. But people have done good factor analysis to know that probably we don't need all 10 to have the same success. What seems to be lacking here, and I wish you would address this, and I would hope the other members of the audience would address this, which are the specific programs, which are the specific, tactics, which are the specific issues that if we address in this particular way will give us that success, and then we can measure what really is the cost and then calculate what the cost benefit will be.
Mm-hmm. These are actually related points, I would say. In a way, the second is a partial answer to the first. Nutrition has a number of challenges. The payoff is long-term. It depends as much on behavior as it does on technology and so forth. But it also has some things going for it, one of which is because it is ultimately a biological function, this is much more rigorously evaluable than an awful lot of investments that countries make, right? I mean, there's there are all kinds of myths out there that drive investments. They're done either for prestige or because people really think hosting the Olympics is somehow going to pay for itself. Or so on and so forth. And very, very few programs actually are rigorously evaluated. And so countries can go on for years or decades investing in things on only the thinnest reed of support. One advantage to this is we do have more and more robust now evaluations of what works in this area. So even if it's hard to win the time frame argument, you may well win the scientific grounding argument and that's why I stress so much the power of nutrition is going to follow the science. And not try to outsmart it or skirt it, because the whole point is these things are already proven, in the laboratory or in the field. Ideally both, and therefore you're getting value for money here. You're taking a leap of faith if you invest in that other thing just because 10 other countries did it. It doesn't mean it will pay off. Or yes, it will be done in 3 years, but it may not have any impact. So this is a big part of it. And the answer will obviously depend on what it is that you're trying to put in place and in which country and so forth. But really emphasizing and drawing on the strength of the evidence base, I think is a powerful method. The second point is, if the time frame is too long for ultimate objectives, one helpful thing is to break it down into shorter term intermediate objectives, right? If there's something that is a necessary but insufficient step to get to here, but it's measurable in a shorter time frame, that can be a benchmark that you set for yourselves or let the country set to say, all right, we know that to reach that we're going to have to pass through this milestone first. That's a goal we can set within 2 years and begin to measure. That said, actually, we have begun to see stunting rates come down in real time, right, in some countries, in measurable increments. Not 10 percentage points at a time, but 2 or 3 here or there, such that over time, even in a 4-year administration, you could say, look, this has moved. And because in so many countries it hasn't moved in so long, any movement right now would be progress. And you could say, look, we've broken the trend. We've put a kink in the curve. We've broken with 20 years of failed policies, and we're the first administration in a generation to actually make progress in this area. And then that can become self-sustaining in and of itself. So I'm not pessimistic about the ability to move these numbers. And other things that are related to this, of course, can also move. I mean, if you achieve better health coverage and you know that you've embedded in the health services the right degree of nutrition-sensitive and nutrition-specific interventions, then you can say the coverage of these things is going up, and it's only a matter of time before we begin to see the results. And, of course, ultimately, the results are real. They are literally scientific. They're anthropometric in a way that the results of road building aren't necessarily. You could prove that you built the road, but you don't build a road for its own sake. You build it because you say we're going to add 3 percentage points to this region's economic output over the next 20 years. Nobody goes back 20 years later to hold anyone accountable whether that worked or not, right? Whereas here, those kids in 2 years, they're either going to be, 4 centimeters taller or they are not. I'm an old first-time parent, and my poor daughter's first 2 years years on Earth, she was subject to a fanatical number of measurements on the changing table because I felt the clock ticking all the time. I said, if I raise a malnourished child, this is a terrible thing. But, you could see it. I have the curves on my iPad, and, you can watch this develop very quickly. So there are things that you can do, and you can do this at at the level of a country or a district so that policymakers can be getting real-time data in a way it's something that nobody can take away from them. The road might be washed away tomorrow. The child, as long as she keeps growing, will stay there. And I'm not saying anything against roads, by the way. They're crucial, and we don't have enough of them in the developing world, but it's just a matter of sort of bargaining power at the policy table.
Hi, I'm Allison Stubbe from UNC Chapel Hill. Fabulous presentation, and fabulous to hear someone who thinks about the economics advocating for this issue. I wonder about the economics of women's time and women's work. Because exclusively breastfeeding for 6 months takes a lot of women's time and work. And that's time that is not counted in any GDP. That's time that she's not getting paid to do something else. And I wonder about how we can value a woman's reproductive work and her productive work in a way that recognizes that she can't do them at the same time, and that right now women are just bearing the brunt of that without any compensation.
No, it's a very good point. And I'm not expert enough in this to give you a up-to-date answer, but I know that there is thinking and work going on in this area of whether there's a robust way of valuing women's time and actually building it into economic modeling, or whether it's better instead to think about how to protect the time of women in the formal labor force in order to do things that only women can do, basically breastfeeding, and recognizing the need for that, and it's the fact that it has such a high payoff both for the family and the household and for the larger economy. But I think there does need to be more thinking on this, and this is not to mention, of course, the tremendous amount of domestic services that women provide around the world, and that does create real value for the economy. In the same way that we're thinking about doing more green accounting in economies. If you're producing economic growth, but you're doing it by burning, non-renewable fuels and polluting the atmosphere, you probably need to be tweaking those numbers a bit because they're overestimating what you're actually doing.
If you had to give one piece of advice to this austere group, what road would you tell us to take?
Well, it's such a diverse group. I think it would be a little counterproductive to try to give one piece of advice. Keep the faith, keep the message, keep up the pressure is my main advice. We all probably went to graduate school thinking that we'd go out there and we would help find the right answers, and then that would change the world. And the truth is, the right answer barely gets you a ticket to play, right? And it's never the end of the conversation. And what it really comes down to is being able to frame things in ways that will garner attention. So it's as I said, I think the time is ripe for this. I'll be very honest, since we're sort of in the family here. For a long time, I've been in the bank for 25 years. I've been interested in nutrition for all of that time. And for many years, I would gather nutrition specialists together and say, okay, our countries are paying zero attention to this. What can we do to help them move forward? And inevitably, the conversation would devolve into a screaming match over zinc dosages. And I'd say, okay, they're here. They need to get here. Can we find step one to get here without sort of ending up shouting at each other about the literature and where we are in something? So we've come a long way since then. There's a lot more savvy community here now. Modern technology has helped a great deal, both in terms of just making the information more available and giving us more interactive tools with households. So I think we've come a long way. But still, at the end of the day, it's never the best idea, or it isn't necessarily the best idea that wins or the best case. The economics alone is never enough. It's really about the framing, the packaging, the access, the capitalizing, exploiting, proper timing and events, and just getting this onto the agenda in ways that can stick, and then having a few quick successes that everybody can point to. It's amazing how much there is a tendency for a snowball effect in one direction or the other. So some programs get a couple of well-publicized early successes, and then they get a halo effect, and everybody wants to do them. And sometimes that's way out ahead of the evidence. Other things, you get a couple of early failures, and you can never dig out of that rut. So these are maybe the two most sobering lessons for me after a quarter century. Is the evidence alone isn't enough. It's really a matter of constantly managing and massaging the message, not in a cynical way, but just to make sure that you're reaching people in the terms that they'll understand, and always have at your ready exactly the kind of evidence that they need at that point to move to the next stage. So it's not a very simple message, but it's the one that I think is going to create the most likelihood of success. And thank you all for your commitment and your great contributions on this, without which the money would be useless. So.
Well, and since we've been talking about nutrition, we thought we'd provide some. So it is time for lunch, but thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.